life will kill you. Whether you operate in a dangerous environment or not, life will kill you. What are you going to leave behind for your kid? If you were to have a car crash or die base jumping off a mountain, if you can live something substantial for your child, I mean, that's really powerful.
Welcome to the Athlete Dad Podcast, where we explore the intersection between physical pursuits and fatherhood. I'm your host, Ben Gibson. If you're an ambitious dad that is pursuing or looking to pursue your athletic passions now while improving the way you show up at home, then we have a great show for you. Today's episode is with the legendary Matthias Giraud, also known across the world simply as Superfrenchie. You can find him on Instagram at Superfrenchie Official. And there's also this documentary of his life I would highly recommend you check out as well, also titled Superfrenchie, where you'll get even more insights into his feats and, most importantly, I think, his philosophies behind them. He is a professional mountain athlete in the truest sense of the word. Matthias specializes in alpinism, steep skiing, and base jumping, often doing all three of these on a single peak. I want to break that down for you because without the proper context, you will not fully understand how incredibly impressive Matthias is as an athlete. So first, Matthias is an elite big mountain skier. So he's bringing all of his technical gear, skis included, and he's climbing to the top of these very steep, very technical peaks. And of course, he's skiing. So now once he reaches the summit, he puts on his skis, he turns around, and he skis down some of the most technical terrain in the world. Tight couloirs, varied terrain, incredible speeds, and often all in the same lines. But he's also base jumping. So when Matthias gets to a large cliff or an ice wall, he launches off of it with his skis, base jumping off the cliff, deploying a parachute, and descending down to the ground. So when we talk about ski base jump, that's what we're talking about. He's completed many first descents and ski base jumps across the globe. He's the only person to have ski base jumped what's called the Alps trilogy, so the Eiger, Matterhorn, and Mont Blanc. Simply put, these are some of the, if not the most challenging combinations of sport ever performed on a mountain. Most importantly, Matthias is a dad, a very rad dad at that. He's also an incredibly thoughtful, authentic, transparent person. But I thought we got into some of just the most pure distillations of some of life's biggest questions. And we got really deep into topics like, how do we translate the benefits we realize from our sport into our families? We talk a lot about meaning and the purpose of life and how to pursue it. But Matthias doesn't hold back on his thoughts about the world. And I think that that's what makes this conversation so special and his insight so valuable is that given his experience doing all these things as an athlete and as a father, he's got a very unique perspective on things. And it's a really important thing, I think, for everybody to hear. So this one was so much fun to record. And I hope you enjoy my very wide-ranging conversation with Superfrenchie. I have been very excited for this conversation for a really long time. And so, Matthias, thank you so much for jumping on to have a conversation today.
Thanks for having me. All good. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So I think that the thing that I'm always interested to start off with is that there's this really funny contrast between how athletes are perceived in the public eye and how athletes are perceived at home. They could be, very prestigious and really well known at a high level outside, but at home, they're just dad. And so I'm curious, like for you, like what's the dynamic at home with Matthias as dad?
I'm very close to my son. We have a really tight bond and relationship. I think I'm very fortunate that it's funny because I have friends that are rock stars, that have kids and stuff like that. And at home, it's just like, whatever. Dad is like, it's almost like he's just a dad, even though the guy will play in front of like 20,000 people and get them all fired up, But so there's not necessarily that notion of prestige. But my son is really into action sports, so he really respects and values what I do. because I
Mm-hmm.
think he sees the everyday to day dedication to it. And
Mm-hmm.
so at home, it's almost the we are very close. It's almost more of a mentorship relationship than just classical fatherhood.
Mm-hmm.
And my son always says that we're almost like he's almost like my little brother.
Hmm.
And so there's respect. Like he knows not to mess with me because I'm actually a really strict dad.
Hmm.
But at the same time, I'm extremely loving, and I always take the time to explain, break down ideas, concepts. We talk a lot, and so we that's the relationship we have. But at the same time, yeah, it's really funny because you're when you're a professional athlete, you don't have professional life separated from your private life. It's all blended in. So
Mm-hmm.
he'd be, eating his little snack, and I'm just in the living room packing my parachute, and he's just for him, it's completely normal. He's
Yeah.
like, "Where are you gonna jump off next?" Dad? I'm just gonna be like, "Oh, I'm gonna go do this." All right, cool, cool. Or be like, "Yeah, did your friend die?" I was like, "Yeah, he died." "What did you do?" "How he did this and this." It's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, he messed up." Huh? I was like, "Yeah, exactly." So it's very pragmatic. Yeah, there are times when it's tense when you're getting ready to go do a nerdy projects, and I don't lie to my son ever. I always explain it in words that he can understand as a child. But so we have this very honest and open connection, as a father and son. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that imagery of like the other dads like stuffing their briefcase with stuff to go to work, and you're just over there stuffing your parachute to go to work. That's so cool.
Sometimes I bring him to the drop zone with me, and he's just chilling and skateboarding when I'm just loading up the plane and flying my wingsuit and landing. Be like, "All right, I'm gonna go do a couple jumps now. I'll take you to the skate park." And be like, "Okay, that's cool." So it's totally normal. So yeah.
Yeah, that's so cool. Is that how you thought you would show up as a dad? Like, I know no one can predict like this is the dad I'm going to be, but I feel like men especially feel like we kind of come into being a father as like these are the things I think I'm going to do well at. This is kind of how I want to show up. Did you think you were going to be the strict dad or show up as the way you do, or was it totally different when once you became a dad?
I think there's a cultural element too. I didn't know I was going to be a dad in America,
Mm-hmm.
which is a country that doesn't really have social codes and norms and social rigidity in many ways. It
Mm-hmm.
does in others, right? But France has the weight of tradition,
Mm-hmm.
which has expected behaviors that come with that. Therefore, we're a lot more old school for many things, right? So for me, I never reflected that that was strict. It just was.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought, or if you asked me when I was a teenager or in my early 20s, I would have been like, yeah, I want to be the cool dad that's always going to do cool stuff with his son, and I am. I mean, it sounds maybe arrogant to say I'm a cool dad, but I think I do a lot of cool stuff with my son because I know he
Mm-hmm.
says all the time, like, I'm so lucky to be able to do that with my dad. It's like, well, many ways, yeah, I get it because I wasn't able to do that with my dad.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to build myself, and now I can pass that on to my kid. But yeah, I never reflected on my parenting style. I always thought I was going to be a dad. For me, it's like, yeah, I'll be a dad someday. Obviously it comes with some realization once you are a dad,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
and then that's when you fine tune your technique or how you do it. And but I think my goal is always was always clear as a dad because I remember how I was as a child. And I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of parents forget how they were as a child or what was difficult for them or irritated them or what they wanted. I remember I couldn't stand arbitrary decisions, so I'm always trying to be fair, which is hard because I'm not a patient person. So I always have to counterbalance the two. So no arbitrary behavior. That's the thing that I learned from my parents that I knew I was
Mm-hmm.
never going to apply to my kid. I think there's a generational thing too.
Mm-hmm.
So always taking the time to explain why you say
Yeah.
yes, why you say no. And that
Oh
goes a
man.
long way. It's a lot of work when they're like 3 or 4. But now, starting age 5, we could travel to France together and I could fully trust him.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's awesome. I see so many
Yeah.
5-year-olds out there that are out of control, and I'm just like, your kid is just a Tasmanian devil. Like I can't stand him or her.
Mm-hmm.
Like, but obviously that's a reflection of are you taking the time to break things down?
Yeah.
So your son or daughter has that connectivity with the world and understands its surrounding.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, arbitrary behavior and then making him independent and autonomous as early as possible because I
Yeah.
really valued my independence as a kid. At 5, I didn't really have a very nurturing mom. My dad was very loving but very absent, so I just had to learn, to do things on my own. And I had awesome older sisters, but they were 12 and 9 years older than me. So 5 years old, I would just walk from the house to the lift, put on my ski boots on my own, and go to ski coaching by myself.
Hmm.
I walk like a mile to go to skiing by myself at 5. Which
Wow.
back in the day felt like normal, but now that I'm looking at this today's world, I'm like, well, kids don't have that self-reliance and independence.
Yeah.
And yeah, sure, I got in trouble a little bit here and there, but because you like to test your environment. But I think that was
Hmm.
what I really valued was my independence and autonomy as a kid, but I couldn't stand arbitrary behavior. So these were the three things that I really insist on.
Yeah, I love that. That explaining the whys of things. Looking back at my own childhood, that was it for me, where it felt like I wasn't included in a lot of the decisions, or I wasn't. I wanted a seat at the table. I was like, dude, I'll go along with it, but just like help me understand why we are doing what we're doing, because otherwise, yeah, the Tasmanian devil behavior makes total sense because these kids are just flying by the seat of their pants. No one has set expectations for them. They have no idea like what's coming. They don't have a seat at the table with that mutual respect, so they're not like a part of the equation, and so they're almost like
Yeah.
at the airport, like another piece of luggage just being dragged through the airport to get onto the airplane. So,
Yeah, no,
yeah.
it's true. Like CERN has always been a travel companion. Like we are doing things together, and you traveled
Hmm.
really early on. Uh, and even since then, my ex-wife now, so his mom and I separated, we got divorced. But the thing is, what I always say to him is like, hey, listen, like I'm not imposing a schedule on you. Is this something you want to tweak? Do you want to
Hmm.
change things a little bit? Like, for example, switch off days. We used to do it on Sunday. Now we switched it on Friday. So we preserve the weekend. So
Hmm.
it's easier. And I asked her, I was like, would that be better for you? He's like, actually, yeah, I like that better. And so it's taking him into account. It's like, listen, you're not just a pawn that we're just moving around. You're part of the equation. You have your say in things. But we also have the authority as parents.
Hmm.
So, but your voice is heard and your intuition and desires are taken into account.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
huge. And it's that work up front, right? I think a lot of parents probably avoid it because it's certainly a lot more work to do up front, to have to stop and explain things and have to wait for them to like physically get going with you if you're going to give them the autonomy. But it certainly does, pay off in the long run when you have a confident,
100%.
independent kid.
100%. And I think a lot of it is, yeah, sure, every kid has his disposition. There are kids that you connect with more than others. It's just like people. They're people, right? So there's people that you can have a constructive conversation with very easily, others where you can't. It just happens, right? And sometimes that happens between parents and their kid. Like they're not on the same page. Their personalities don't match somehow. Like the mysteries of genetic, it doesn't flow. That
Hmm.
happens. But I think a lot of the time, it's honestly parents choosing the easy option.
Hmm.
It's like if you're a lazy parent, well, your kid's gonna suck. I hate to say it, but that's just
Yep.
the way it is. Like diverting instead of confronting. When your kid does something bad, trying to divert their attention to something else, like, no, you're not dealing with the issue.
Hmm.
You are just being a weak-minded parent, just choosing and I'm very potent with my words, and I understand this. But for
Hmm.
me, it's laziness and weakness. No, grab your kid, look at them in the eyes and be like, you didn't like something they did, or they did something dangerous, be like, you will never do this ever again. And
Hmm.
you understand why.
Hmm.
This and this and this. But then at the same time, too, they do something awesome, be like, that was great. Do you know why that was great? Well,
Hmm.
because this and this and this. Yeah, it takes time. But do this during the foundational years, and then you'll be great later. You'll be in
Yeah.
good shape. It's like having a
Right.
puppy, man. If you don't lay down the law with your puppy right away, but you're also loving and constructive, your dog is going to be out of control for the rest of its life, unless it's like
Yes.
until it's an old dog and then it just doesn't have the energy to go. And I feel like kids are the same, and at the same time too, when they're little, they're so primal that it's literally a big part of it is a dominant dominator relationship, but it doesn't have to be an authoritarian kind of model either, because
Hmm.
it's very loving, and there's kids are smart, man. They can do. I think a lot of the issue too comes with, and I'm not an expert in parenting. I'm just sharing how I did it, right?
Sure.
But some people might disagree with me, but I think kids often can do a lot more than we think and
Hmm.
understand a lot more than we think. Our
Yep.
duty is just to put it in words that they can understand, or establish a frame that is approachable for them. But my son just turned 10, and but even, yeah, as a starting the age of 5, we'd have some very deep conversation about some pretty serious subjects, such as
Hmm.
death or purpose or meaning to your actions, or to your life, things like that, like some very philosophical existential conversations. Maybe it's the
Hmm.
French gene in there, but we sometimes you throw concepts at me and be like, wow, that is actually a very, very, very analytical and smart synthesis that you made of that chain of events.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it's, yeah, I mean, my friend Scott Bedbury, he was he lives in Bend. He was the advertising director of Nike, and he always said one of his, he was behind the original Just Do It campaign. He's just such a brilliant person. Definitely one of the most influential persons in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And he always said one of his key concepts in marketing was, he always said, listen to the little people, you know. And when he did some consulting for Barbie or things like that, he would throw into the board of director meeting concepts that his daughter shared with him, you
Mm-hmm.
know. So it's like, it's not, you know, obviously your kid's going to know more about toys than you, for example. So listen to them. Like, they know so
Yeah.
many more things than we actually do. It's evolution, right? Your kid is supposed to be
Mm-hmm.
better than you. So give them the tool to actually be, instead of
Yeah.
being a hindrance.
Absolutely. They are absolutely way smarter. I really resonated with that in the transition of my son not talking to then talking, and hearing the things that he would start to try to say, or especially once he fully started speaking, I was like, wow, like you picked up on those things before you could even speak, and you retained them and built upon them. So especially with my second son, I was like, wow, I need to be so much more deliberate about the things that we're saying around him and the way that we're talking to him and sharing with him, because he's already getting it. And
Yeah,
think starting, getting a year of a heads up on those kinds of things makes such a world of difference. I really appreciate the potency, by the way. I always say that, like, I think if somebody hears something and they're offended by it, I think it's because inside they know that there's truth to that for them. So yeah, we can be as potent as we absolutely need to. So
perfect. Well, a lot of the time when you have heated reactions, it's because of self projections of internal issues or problems or failure, you
mm-hmm,
know. And so it's not necessarily something to take personally. So, well, you know, got to remember also, people have potent comments come from a certain experience that shaped the comments now, and the reaction is the same thing. It's based on our, you know, experiences.
mm-hmm,
So I think there needs to be some pragmatism, not detachment, but pragmatism that needs to be applied to it, I think,
mm-hmm.
you know. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, I love it, man. That's awesome. I want to step back a bit and talk more about your work as an athlete as well, and especially for a lot of folks that what I love is that you have so much crossover in your mountaineering, your ski mountaineering, your skiing, and your base jumping, and how you tie it all together. That you definitely touch a lot of different audiences. But for folks that might not be totally aware of the things that you do, I think first off, a lot of people only see like the end result of what you do. Like they see you jumping off a cliff, and the perception might just be like, whoa, that's like reckless. But something that's very apparent when you watch your documentaries or talk to you is that there's a whole lot that goes into a climb. So the jumping off the cliff is the end result. Then there's the whole working backwards to training, then working backwards to the planning and the preparation. And I think there's an even more interesting layer before that, which is like the beginning of when you have that idea come to your mind, and especially when you start like laying the framework with conversations with friends and family, and like, hey, this is what I want to do, and here's kind of what I'm thinking. So like if you can help me understand, like, what is your process for identifying a goal and then working out how you're actually going to manifest that into reality?
But I think goals, let's say if it's a goal in the mountain, a lot of the time it comes from inspiration or an idea, or, oh, I'd like to do something like this, and then you find the ground that is, for example, years ago I wanted to ski really a tight couloir and add a base jump to it, and then
Mm-hmm.
I found a place to do it, for example, you know. So we did Heavens 11 in Telluride in Colorado, which was a 2,000-foot couloir that ended on a 300-foot cliff. So I had, you know, to ski the whole thing. It's just technical, fairly steep skiing in a narrow chute where sometimes like my skis would barely fit, so I had to wiggle my back against the rocks to get. So that's, and then I was able to tie that, for example, with an ad campaign for a sponsor at the time, so we could get funding for that. So a lot of the time I try to, on the business level, I try to align my dreams with business plans, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
and goals and strategies from companies. And that's why I think people need to understand, like, being an athlete is more than just slapping on a logo and doing cool shit. It's being a multifaceted consultant. You know, you're helping with marketing strategies, you're helping with content creation, you are an advertising agency by them, you know, using you as a billboard in many ways
Mm-hmm.
too. Athletes are a commodity, but you can transcend that role by being an advisor.
Hmm.
And that's really what I try to do on a professional level. As far as other projects, for example, the I did the first ski base jump. So I ski with a parachute on my back, jump off a big cliff, open a parachute, and fly away. So I combine skiing and base jumping at once, and I really use that as a tool to ski things that have never been skied or to do first, right?
Hmm.
But after picking the low hanging fruit, taking a lift, or getting dropped by a helicopter, then I started climbing to access my cliffs. So that's when the mountaineering came into play. And then the climbing, at first I was a ski racer. So then it was just adding skills to be able to not isolate disciplines, but have it be a journey through the mountains. So some
Hmm.
projects take a while. When I did the first ski base jump from the summit of Mont Blanc, it took me 8 years to be able to do it, to wait
Hmm.
for the right weather window, the right conditions, the right physical and mental state and preparation. And then when I did it, there was no cliff big enough to jump off from the summit of Mont Blanc, but there was an ice wall, a serac. And so I jumped it in 2019, but in 2020, the serac broke and it receded by like 100 feet. So I'll never be jumpable again. So it's
Hmm.
also seizing the opportunity at the right time, establishing a frame of execution, how you narrow down when you pull the trigger, when you narrow down or identify your window. And I think a lot of these skills I try to apply to my everyday life, which obviously I'm not failure proof or a life guru, so I can't do that
Hmm.
efficiently every day. But I try to get inspiration from the way I'm able to do things in the mountains to apply to my daily life, because doing it so much, the mountains are not easy, but the process feels very seamless because you just know how to do it,
Hmm.
and it's still overwhelming sometimes, but I always try to remind the lessons that I learn in the mountains to apply to everyday life. So I think it starts with having the honesty to let yourself be inspired by your environment.
Hmm.
And then sometimes I see a picture of a mountain and I'm like, oh my God, that looks so beautiful. I want to do
Hmm.
this. And a lot of the time I end up doing first because, well, first, there's not many people ski base jumping. And second of all, there's a lot of people that don't look to ski or jump the things that I've been looking at, just
Hmm.
having a different eyes, and not being a kind of one frame kind of skier. I'm not the guy skiing switch and doing flat spin 720s, in the park. Like, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, I used to do a lot of tricks, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, like double backflips. I did a triple backflip once, but now I'm exploring a different approach to my craft. And I think it's another quote from my friend Scott. He said, a great brand is a story that is never fully told. Well, I think the
Hmm.
same thing happens to the career of an athlete. The career of an athlete always goes through different chapters, and it's part of the evolution, and it's having the awareness to use every step as a stepping stone to the next step, to the next
Hmm.
level. And I think that's big part of the process is fully never disconnecting. I'm
Hmm.
always thinking of what I want to do, and it's not just searching for something, it's just really reflecting on what I've done, what I would like to do, and yeah, being inspired by my environment, and then laying down. I've had the ability somehow to lay down a strategy or an approach or methodology to be able to reach those goals. So
Hmm.
yeah, it comes with a lot of thorough step.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally feel you on the like seeing a specific peak or a specific section on a mountain, and it's almost like falling in love. There's something like the
Yeah,
butterflies in your stomach. You're like, "Ooh, yeah, like I wonder what that would be like," or "Oh, yeah, that ridge and down through that cool couloir, like I wonder how we could make that work." So, yeah, I think it's such a natural kind of visceral feeling. And so it sounds like you're really deliberate about constantly putting yourself into these opportunities to feel inspired, to come up with ideas that can help you in that evolution of yourself as an athlete.
yeah, exactly. That was a point of contention, for example, with my ex. I think she saw it really as an opportunistic behavior,
Hmm.
which could be good or bad, but I don't think it's an opportunistic behavior. It's awareness and identifying your surrounding to
Hmm.
be able to be fulfilled in many ways,
Yeah.
and it's not necessarily a selfish approach, just like being opportunistic. I think it is a an approach of conscious self fulfillment,
Hmm.
also weighing in your actions compared to what it does for others, how it will impact everything around you, like your family,
Hmm.
like your friends, like your partners, your climbing partners, your friends that are guides that are going to help you accomplish a project. It's a team effort. And that's what I try to really reflect. I think a lot of people see or I did that for years, kind of like the shock value of the raw factor of the jump, which I still
Hmm.
share a lot. But now really break down the methodology, the ethos, the spirit, the philosophy behind it, and the steps to get there. And by
Mm-hmm.
sharing that journey, it's almost just as important, if not more, than just the jump itself or the ski
Mm-hmm.
descent. It's everything
Yeah.
that leads to it. And so I think, yeah, there's obviously, to identify opportunities, you got to have some of that opportunistic mindset, but that doesn't necessarily make you an opportunist in the negative sense of the term when you're just
Mm-hmm.
using and abusing.
Mm-hmm.
It's no, actually, I think it's more of an approach of respect, because you have to keep it sustainable for yourself and others, and also respectful for the environment that you evolve in, which is the mountains, the ski outdoor industry.
Mm-hmm.
If you're an asshole, well, the world will get by really, really quickly, and then no brands are going to want to work with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just an example, among others. But at the same
Sure.
time, brands are going to appreciate your ability to identify opportunities, which is what every business does, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Sure.
I think it's necessary to whatever you want to accomplish. You want to figure out that opening, that space that hasn't been filled, or where there is something that could be added to that pyramid. Oh, there's a stone missing there. We could do
Mm-hmm.
that. And I think it's identifying patterns
Mm-hmm.
more than anything else.
Yeah. And I think it like I am such a firm believer that physical pursuits, sports, whatever, however you want to label it, are directly applicable to the rest of our lives. As you mentioned, it's how we show up as an athlete helps us show up better as a dad. And so I think in these conversations where you're talking about you're able to identify patterns, you're identifying when the opportunity is right. Like I can't help but see that also benefiting you as a dad, where it's like, hey, this is I'm seeing this pattern with my son, and I'm feeling like this is a really big opportunity for me to step in and to coach or to provide guidance or to correct or to love or whatnot. And especially if you're always staying on top of it, because I think the worst thing for one, I think the worst thing a parent can be is absent, but two, the worst thing I think that a parent can be is present, but not present. Like they're physically
Yeah.
there, but they're not paying attention. And so what I hear is that if you're constantly looking for these opportunities and feeling things out and reading the situation, that's going to just help you execute on these things much better, much faster at the right time, in all aspects of your life.
Yeah, and I think it's going through the motions versus being in there. And I think for dads, it's also, we never really hear about the traumatic side of fatherhood, because it is the first few years you're like, what the hell is this? Like, you love your kid, but yeah, I personally experienced zero fulfillment from family life. I was just like at home being like, oh God, doing everything out of love and duty, but not necessarily out of passion, or
Mm-hmm.
enthusiasm. But then eventually, as your kid gets through these early difficult years, but then when you get around the age of 4 or 5, this is when you can really share. And I always say, the first step when you have a passion is to live it, and the second step is to share it.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to then pass that on through, again, that relationship of mentorship, which I was talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Basic fatherhood holds nothing for me. Putting food on the table and just a roof over your head, yeah, it's very commendable, right? You're keeping your family safe and you're providing for them, but there's not really something rewarding for me. Maybe it's first world problems, right? Because we have access to so much more, and
Mm-hmm.
we can focus more on purpose and existentialism versus basic survival. It is a luxury, right? But at the same time, for me, really, fatherhood finds its value into passing it on. For the dad to be a mentor, you also have to be accepted by your protege, which might not always be a given. I'm
Mm-hmm.
lucky that I have that with my son,
Mm-hmm.
and we are really, really close with this, and I think that's a beautiful element of fatherhood. But for me, yeah, I don't really imagine fatherhood without any of this. But I think that's the same
Mm-hmm.
thing for dads listening today. Is, dude, you're going through the thick of it right now. Your kid is 2 and coming home, and you're not connecting with your wife like you used to, and the short-term quality of your life has been hugely affected.
Mm-hmm.
But as long as you and your partner can be completely vulnerable and approach each other with vulnerable connectivity, you will survive, you know. And
Yeah.
if you don't, you will not survive.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's such a common theme, especially in the early years of being a father, especially even the first few months. There feels like there's this like relationship disconnect, and it isn't until they start to get older and their personalities start to show up a bit and you're able to start having those kinds of connections that I think the fulfillment really starts to kick in.
Having a child is very polarizing. So
Mm-hmm.
if your couple is strong to begin with, it will reinforce that bond as long as you are openly vulnerable with the other person and sharing and listening
Mm-hmm.
and sharing, and being able to communicate. But if there is some disconnect that you could be aware or not aware of, it will, it will amplify the process. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I think in the end, having a child is the make it or break it for a relationship, because you're gonna fully know right there if you as compatible as you thought you were, or actually if you weren't.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
nothing quite mixes things up like adding 100% more people into the equation. So,
Oh yeah, yeah,
but
exactly. I mean, you're adding variables, so it's going to stress the system overall. It's just,
yeah,
basic math, right? And that's what's
sure.
happening to the planet right now with overpopulation as well. Like
Yeah.
having too many kids, where we're saturating the planet.
Hmm.
And see a lot of I have a lot of friends that have, 3 kids, and they're doing a great job as parents, but you're more than multiplying yourself, so you're adding to the problem.
Hmm.
And it's having a child is a privilege and a luxury.
Hmm.
It's not necessarily it's not necessarily it's going to be sound horrible to a lot of people. I think it's not necessarily a given right. Like your actions are going to impact directly the micro level of how this planet is functioning.
Oh
So,
yeah.
you driving an electric car because you don't want to have more impact on the environment, or maybe you becoming vegan. Well, that's debatable too, but you being a
Yeah.
vegan to not necessarily impact the environment, but you have 4 kids. Well, that's a very contradictory behavior. You know,
Hmm.
uh, but if you have one child, and because you're going to have to take 20 airplanes a year for work, well then, I guess your carbon allowance, even though I hate to use that term, but like,
Hmm.
well, right there, actually, that's more sustainable.
Hmm.
Because your overall impact has not been as multiplied as the way you think. And I really didn't really think about this until I had a child, and I started realizing the amount of waste with a kid through the whole diaper thing. And we did
Yeah.
cloth diapers, so that was very sustainable.
Yeah.
But I was like, you're realizing that if you have a baby, you're throwing away 20 plastic bags per day.
Hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
you have 4 kids, well, then that's 80 plastic bags a day. You know,
Yeah.
do you want to be that guy?
Yeah. Absolutely,
God, I'm
man.
gonna get so many haters after this conversation.
Oh no, not at all. You're speaking the truth, man. Dude, we had this sickness in our
Yeah.
stomach. So my son was born preterm. He was born 25 weeks, and so he was in NICU for 4 months. And we,
Okay.
in our lives, have tried to avoid plastic at all costs. And it was so hard because in 4 months of the NICU, every single thing around him, all hours of the day, was plastic, and it all got replaced every day. And so every day they're just like dumping heaps of full trash cans of plastic out. And we're just like, oh my God, like this is stressing me out because like there's no other option at the moment. You
Yeah.
can't have glass or wood, it's just one of those things. So yeah, I think that the more that people think about the same way of like I need to help my kid be a good person because it impacts the world. I think they definitely need to think about how they're impacting the environment with the way that they're raising their kids as well. Am I buying them a bunch of plastic shit that's going to live in a dump for 2,000 years, or am I buying sustainable products? Am I trying to raise them in a sustainable way? Am I buying regenerative food so that there's healthy food that being eaten, but it's also good for the environment? So like we could go down a whole rabbit hole, but I definitely think you're spot on. It's just another layer of how we need to think about the impact of our parenting on the future of the world. So,
Yeah, and it's not to draw a far-fetched parallel, but with ski-based jumping, for example, when I started ski-based jumping, we were throwing our poles. I was following,
hmm,
the lead of established ski-based jumpers like Shane McConkey, Eric Roner, JT Holmes, that were friends as well. So that was really cool. But so I didn't really, ask any questions. I'm skiing down, throwing my poles away to jump off, to have my hands clear to deploy my parachute and fly
hmm,
it. But after like 20 or so ski base jumps, it's like, dude, I am littering every time I'm throwing. This big piece of metal is fine, but there's a lot of plastic, a lot of stuff that will never go away and that is left in the mountains forever.
Yeah.
So then I started going to bamboo poles, but they
Hmm.
started breaking with the cold. I made like a cork grip, and the basket, I still had to use plastic on the basket. So then eventually I was able to put some masonite on it, which is wood primarily, with a little plastic in there, but it biodegrades a lot. But then, yeah,
Hmm.
poles were snapping. And then I didn't have the safety of a reliable pole, which, again, like you have a kid in the NICU, you have to go through all this plastic for the survival of the child. I get
Hmm.
that. But could it be avoided? If no, well, then keep doing this. But if you can avoid it, then maybe find a better option. So now, for
Hmm.
example, I'm able to ski base jump and keep my poles, which adds an element of, um, which takes away some safety. So I had to fine tune a safe process in order to
Hmm.
be able to do it. But now I figured it out after 15 years of ski base jumping. So,
Yeah.
figure out how to fine tune and streamline your process so it can be less impactful than we already are.
Yeah, I was wondering that was what when I was watching some of your jumps, is I was like, that's either the most well done bamboo replica ski pole, or he's literally using a bamboo stick with baskets on it. So,
Yeah, no, for years I made my own poles. But then it was a question of safety. And I'm also sponsored by the best pole company in the world, Lecky, that makes like,
yeah,
World Cup poles. It was my
yeah,
first sponsor 19 years ago. It's crazy.
that's
And
awesome.
I was like, well, poles are probably one of the uh, most underestimated piece of your equipment, but it's so major. Like great
Hmm.
ski poles add for your stability, being able to ski steep terrain. There's so many technical elements to having the right poles for skiing,
Hmm.
and is skis, boots, poles, and then your bindings as well. These are probably the most crucial piece of your equipment right there. All of
Hmm.
them have to be solid. And I felt like by trying to be sustainable, I was compromising on safety. I was like, nah, that's not cool. I got to figure out a way to be able to keep my poles, but then not be an asshole and just litter at every jump because that's not
Yeah.
cool. you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love the intentionality of it. And I think coming back to something you said before about, we think about this impact of how we show up on our families, on our kids. I think a lot of men, a lot of dads, they don't pursue their passions, their goals, their ambitions, at least maybe those that are like outside of their job. And I think they don't because they use their families, or their commitment to their families, almost as like rationalization for why it is more noble for them to invest 100% of their time and energy into their families, as opposed to taking time for themselves and finding what gives them fulfillment, what gives them, a sense of satisfaction that helps them show up better. So why do you think more men, more dads don't go out and pursue their passions, pursue the things that really really light them up?
Well, I think there's always every situation is personal and different. So I don't know if we can generalize. I
Hmm.
wish I could. Uh, I think for some of them, yeah, sure, some of them could be lazy. They're just like, oh, yeah. So maybe they were not necessarily as passionate about what they were doing before. Maybe it was more of a
Hmm.
distraction than actually something they really loved. Or they just feel overwhelmed because they have so many things to do as a
Hmm.
dad, and we put a lot of pressure on ourselves as dads, you know. Moms are superheroes on the physical level, because they
Hmm.
do all this stuff and emotional, but dads put so much mental pressure on themselves because you got to be there. You got to bring that, that paycheck home. You got to be able to
Hmm.
keep paying that mortgage. You got to be able to pay for summer camps, all this stuff, right? And we put so much pressure. Uh, I mean, it's the old saying from, I can't remember which philosopher said that. I think, well, it's Marcus Aurelius that said, we suffer more in our thoughts than in reality.
Hmm.
And a lot of the time we do that to ourselves. So I think that feeling of being overwhelmed, and then some guys like me, they're like, I'm never going to compromise my life because this is my passion. That's what I want to do. This is what I chose to dedicate my life with. And but then it's not being a selfish prick either. It's being able to balance that with being
Hmm.
there for your loved ones. And that's why I was talking earlier about, there's an element of selfishness that is so necessary to be fulfilled. But
Hmm.
selfishness, also, if you look at the definition, which I think for years I was just defending selfishness, but then I realized that part of it was wrong because selfishness comes at the detriment of others too. So it's also finding that balance of conscious self fulfillment. Be there for yourself. You have to self actualize as an individual first to be the father that you aspire to be. And if you
Hmm.
do that, you will lead by example, but you'll also be there for your child by making space for yourself. It doesn't mean that
Hmm.
you're forgetting about them. It means that you're walking that line between fulfillment, but also losing it all. You got to find, I always say that's where the fruit is. There's a great quote from Carl Jung that says, "The greatest strategy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents." Unlived life. What are you teaching your kid? Your kid will replicate the same pattern of mediocrity and frustration. That's
Yes.
not a way to live a life. Your kid will be a worm. Teach your kid how to be a freaking eagle. Maybe that's a strong American analogy of the American eagle, but
Yeah.
yeah, teach your kid to be a mountain goat, I guess.
That's the hardest part, is that translation, right? And especially, you've been asked a lot about this idea of, are my pursuits selfish? Are they unnecessarily risky? When I think about these things that we find fulfillment in, and that may be self-serving but not selfish, or I think if that's how you put it, how do we translate what might be considered self-serving into something that's actually positive for our families, for our people around us?
Well, I don't necessarily know if I like the terminology self-serving, because
Mm,
you're serving yourself, which means that you're making abstraction of the environment or others.
mm,
I think it's finding again the balance between fulfillment, self-actualization, while being there for others. There will always be some trade-off.
mhm,
Okay, because I'm gonna go and spend 10 hours or 14 hours training in the mountains today so I can be safe to accomplish my goal, which will result in my professional success. So I can maybe take my kid and travel to France next summer. So, but while I'm in the mountains for 14 hours, well, I can't bring him to his jiu-jitsu or kickboxing or skateboarding practice, right? So
mhm,
you figure it out, right? But in the end, yeah, I guess it's always a question of trade-off, right? And balancing. And I think it's reaching that equilibrium. I really came to realize probably in the last, especially a year or two, that I really strive on an everyday basis to live a life of passion, purpose, and pragmatism. I guess that's my philosophical triangle of passion, purpose, pragmatism.
mhm,
And if I extrapolate this to an existential triangle, you know, uh, existentialism, for people listening that might not be necessarily familiar with it, is finding a meaning to your existence in a meaningless life. In many ways, there's no meaning to life, but what is the meaning to your life? Well, that's
mm,
existentialism in a nutshell, I guess, if I summarize it very rashly. But
mhm,
uh, really, for me, the three elements of that existential triangle is true love, my vocation, which I chose to dedicate my life to, and obviously fatherhood.
mhm,
And whatever triangle you find, you have to keep it equilateral. So each side has to be equal to the other, and it's going to fluctuate, right? Sometimes one side will take over the other, but it's always that balancing act or bringing it back to that leveled center.
mhm,
And if you can do that, then yeah, you will be able to carve out your own place in the world while being able to help people you love carve out their own. I think it's
mhm,
the three elements there. I think it's to find and affirm your place in the world as an individual, to
mhm,
maximize self-actualization, to reach fulfillment as a person, eventually maybe even transcendence, which is the top of the pyramid of Maslow. And then third, to prevent personal blooming to come at the expense of someone else. So it's always balancing these three things.
mhm,
And that's why I really work on. I was talking about that with my partner on the phone today. It's because yeah, she was like, yeah, it's something more than selfishness, because selfishness had that notion of coming out at the expense of somebody else. And I'm like, yeah, that's not cool. But it's
mhm.
that, yeah, that these elements of finding conscious self fulfillment.
Yeah.
And that ultimately is the best lesson you can teach your kid, how to be fulfilled.
Mhm,
Because happiness, everybody talks about, oh, I just want to be happy. Fuck happiness in many ways, just as fuck
mhm,
sadness. These are
mhm,
emotions that are very beautiful or very painful, but they come and go. It's
mhm,
ephemeral. It doesn't last forever. But fulfillment does. If you're fulfilled and you accomplish and you're proud of what you've done, you will still remember it on your deathbed at 90 years old. You
mhm.
know,
Yeah.
it was Whereas in that state of dying on your deathbed, you might not necessarily be happy, but can you be elated from living a fulfilled life?
Mhm,
Well, that's the question. In the end, we can only hope for two things, whatever it means to you: a, a beautiful life and a beautiful death, whatever that means to you.
mhm. Yeah, I love that it's, yeah, whatever it means to you, and making sure that that's sort of the litmus test of how am I navigating the world? Am I doing this because I feel this is what society is telling me I should be doing, or my parents are telling me, or how I feel like I think I should be showing up as a kid, or is this because this is ultimately my truth that I'm pursuing? And I even think you nailed it with like, I want to be happy. Like, man, if you ask most parents, what do you want for your kids? They're like, oh, I just want my kids to be happy. It's like, I want them to be happy, but I don't want them to just be happy. I want them to
Yeah,
navigate every emotion. Like fulfillment requires some suffering, some stress, some setbacks, some sadness. There's a lot that sort of is the fuel that can generate fulfillment. So it's actually like I actually want them to be adaptable. I
yeah,
want them to
yeah.
be able to navigate all these things. Like, how do you think about how do I help my kid be adaptable and seek that fulfillment through adaptability?
Man, I think it's two things: self-awareness and awareness of your surroundings,
Hmm.
which being aware of your place in the world and the impact of the world on you. See, those are
Mm-hmm.
two constant variables that we're confronting. And that's the two variables that I confront in the mountains all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't conquer a mountain, the mountain tolerates you. You're trying to to have your fulfilling experience in a hostile and threatening environment.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to take into account yourself and you have to take into account the environment. It's
Mm-hmm.
pretty much that's it, you know. Is
Yeah.
it complicated? Yeah. If it's complex, then maybe step away from it because then you can't evaluate all the variables.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's complicated, then work on simplifying it.
Yeah.
It's difficult,
Yeah.
but it's complicated to find the simple. But once you have the simple, it simply is.
Mm-hmm.
Just like a relationship. You
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's kind of a constant pursuit of that distillation into simplicity. Like it's I find I very rarely get it there, and as soon as I have it, my environment may change or I change, my self changes, and now all of a sudden I have new constraints, new beliefs, new truths, and I have to redistill what was once simple, now complex again, back down to simplicity. And I think that's kind of where at least I find fulfillment, is a lot of that I'm never done. I'm not committed to an end, an outcome. I'm committed to that process of it. And I love that you have this very like philosophical approach to the way that you show up as a human, but also as an athlete. I think there's a lot of people that have that conquer the mountain mindset, which I always thought was just like, it's kind of silly, but I think that, coming at it with this very, I don't know if spiritual is the right approach, but philosophical approach, where the way I always put it is, climbing was so important to me because the person that went up the mountain was not the same person that came down the mountain. Like, that's why it was so important for me. And it oftentimes after climbs, it would take me weeks or months to really figure out what that particular climb meant for me. And I would find myself just deep in thought, in introspection. What does your process look like for having that introspective conversation with yourself where you sort of like tease out the meaning of these endeavors for you?
Well, there's several elements in what you just talked about. First of all, I think covering out your place in the world and figuring out how to do it to be able to do what you do. It's we're always going through this process of becoming to actually be in a
Hmm.
short moment, right? So, and that constant process of becoming that lead to the state of being is exactly what happens in the mountains. But I always quote a doctor from my hometown in the Alps that is an avid mountaineer, and he says, I go up with questions and I come back with answers.
Hmm.
Because when you span, just here, go up South Sister, it's going to take you depending on the type of athletes you are, between 3 hours and 6 hours to get to the summit. What do you do for 6 hours or for potentially 6 hours? You think.
Hmm.
You're reaching that state of oxygenation of your body, you being elated with the altitude as well, and you're clearing your mind and you're connecting. All thoughts are booming in your head. You have
Hmm.
that privilege of introspection. It is a privilege. But then as you come back, you're connecting the dots forever and conceptualizing.
Hmm.
And that's why I say that what I do is not just skiing or base jumping, it's a philosophical quest. It's
Hmm.
it's active. philosophy put in action.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people adopt these preconceived ideas and concepts, just like, conquering the mountain, or I just want to be happy, or I'm a daredevil. It's like, no, 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 no. You are having a shallow, potential disrespectful approach to your craft.
Mm-hmm.
Take the time to ponder the why and how, and use the accurate words to describe what you're doing, which is an ongoing, endless process.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, philosophical, because philosophy never ends.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. I love that. Yeah, philosophy into action, philosophy in motion. So cool. And I think that you have quite a bit going on when you think about your philosophy in motion. You not just do things in the mountains, but you've also begun surfing and big wave surfing at that. I'm so curious, you've been surfing off the Oregon coast. How does all this sort of tie together for you as an athlete?
I luckily learned to surf when I was 11. My parents sent me to a friend's house, and my mother was not necessarily nurturing, and she just, I think, had kids for social status,
Hmm.
and self positioning, and we
Yeah.
were kind of pawns to her. So every time it was summer, she wanted to go play golf or tennis, and didn't necessarily want to take care of her kids. So she sent us to different places on our own.
Hmm.
And so she sent me to the US when I was 9 by myself in a family I'd never met. But then it was great because it just allowed me to adapt. And 11, I just found myself in the Indian Ocean on an island called Mauritius
Hmm.
for a month with family friends. And they had a kid, my couple years older than me. He was 13, I was 11. So they just took me surfing every day. So after 3 weeks of going to the beach, 7 in the morning to 7 at night, with a little like Nutella sandwich to survive, then I just learned to surf. And so then I always kind of kept surfing recurringly.
Hmm.
When I moved to Oregon, I started surfing more and more. Then I was living in Portland for a year and a half, so I was surfing probably more than I was skiing. And But then I always wanted to surf big waves. I had three dreams as a kid. One was to surf at least a 10-meter wave. The other one was to base jump. The other one was to jump at least a 30 or 100-foot cliff on skis, which
Hmm.
obviously I had done all the other ones except surf a big, big wave. I had
Yeah.
paddled maybe 15-foot faces, so I could handle that. And
Hmm.
physically, I think a lot of training from skiing translate into, except from upper body strength, but if you do a lot of rock climbing, they will translate well into surfing, for example.
Hmm.
So I got back into climbing a lot for my mountaineering approaches. But after I broke my femur in 2013, I was really struggling to surf for my takeoffs. It was really hard to move my hip to get my leg on the board. It was super frustrating being maybe it's audacious to say an expert surfer, but yeah, being able to surf fairly well.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden, I was like, shit, but I really want to tow surf. And I got a tow board made that arrived after I had my crash. I was like, well, let's go. And I had contacts with the guys at the Oregon coast, and they saw my base jumping and skiing videos, and they're like, oh man, if you can handle this, you can handle surfing big waves. It's a lot less dangerous. I was like, that's actually very true. It's very
Yeah.
dangerous, um, but nobody has died technically tow surfing. People died paddling big waves, you know
Hmm.
uh, and the Oregon coast has really big and powerful waves, but they're not as heavy as like a Mavericks or a Jaws or things like
Hmm.
that. So it's even though it's very big moving water, it's very dangerous. But if you do it, same thing, there's got to be a methodology of risk and how to approach it. So I went and
Hmm.
trained with the guys a couple times, and they told me how to do it, and I just went out there and did it.
Hmm.
And I just literally followed the direction. And last thing I know, I'm surfing a 35-foot wave going 40 miles per hour. And I'm like, oh, wow, this feels just like big mountain skiing. It's just riding a big face. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, I don't surf as much as I would like. It's kind of funny because the guys at Nelson Reef, they always make fun of me because I arrive when there's big waves. They give me a call, and then I show up at the beach. They're like, hey, Frenchie, how you doing? We haven't seen you in a while. You been surfing? When's the last time you surfed? I was like, last year here at Nelska. They were like, wait, you haven't surfed in a year? Last time you surfed was like a 30-foot wave. I'm like, yeah, pretty much. So every time I just come in and get thrown
Yeah.
into the lines and then just go and surf massive waves. I mean, massive, it's 30, it's not like a 60-foot or 50-foot wave, but it's still big enough to really put you back in your place. But
Oh,
luckily,
dude. Yeah.
I'm also able to do it with the guidance of very well seasoned surfers.
Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
can't really call myself a big wave surfer. I occasionally dabble in it. So
I love that. I just
yeah.
occasionally dabble in 30 foot waves. That's awesome. But I do see the crossover. Like when I'm a better skier when I think about skiing with the fluidity of surfing and I feel the terrain like it's like water and all of a sudden everything just kind of like clicks into place. And I do also think that, going down a steep run and dropping in on a wave have the same feeling of like commitment. Like dropping in on a wave and committing down the line on a steep face, to me at least, feel very similar. And then especially as, again, the fluidity of carving. So I imagine, you've gotten some, you've surfed some big powder on a mountain. It probably translates pretty well over to the water.
Oh yeah, for sure. And the thing is, I think you put me in like a 5 foot swell or 4 foot waves, like I'm not gonna be the guy snapping a bunch of gnarly turns and catching air doing 360s. Yeah, I'll be able to do like a little floater and snap a turn and carve back,
Hmm.
and I've ran a couple barrels here and there, but I'm not like every time I get out of it, I'm like, oh my god, I got so lucky. It's not like I'm like I'm nowhere like I'm not a Kai Lenny by any means,
Yeah.
but I mean I know how to ride a board, so uh,
Yeah.
that's the thing. But I think a lot of technical surfers that perform extremely well in small waves, with their
Hmm.
short boards, snapping crazy tricks in small waves. When you put them on a big wave, they're overwhelmed because first of all the size, but also the speed,
Hmm.
and they are not used to riding 40 plus miles per hour and having this vibration, that speed in your legs. Skiing, 45 miles per hour is your normal cruising speed at all times. When I
Hmm.
charge Big Mountain, you're going 60, 70 miles per hour.
Hmm.
And where you learn to be really calm and chill at high speed, which is why I think big wave surfing in many ways is way more like skiing than just regular surfing,
Yeah.
because it's learning to operate and stay cool at high speed on it's a big moving mountain, but it's like almost riding big mountain with slough around you. It's
Hmm.
like that's when you ride down a steep face and it's sloughing, you have to figure out your line so you don't get caught in the slough, which is almost like whitewash on the wave.
Hmm.
And you have to learn to chill and not overexert yourself when you're going at high speed while absorbing the terrain. So the muscle memory and power that you develop in your legs from skiing translates very well into big wave surfing.
Yeah, that's great. I want to talk a bit about your most recent film, Adrenaline Sucks, and then I would love to hear more about what's next for you. So yes, please tell me about the film.
Adrenaline Sucks is born because it's very philosophical.
Hmm.
I had my movie Superfrenchie that was made by Chase Ogden several years ago.
Hmm.
It portrayed pretty much my journey as an athlete, but I had no creative input in the movie. There was 90% of the movie that I can stand behind, 10% where I'm not necessarily I'm not displeased, but I'm not necessarily pleased either by it. And then Chase approached me again last year and a half ago, and he teaches film at Eastern Washington University, and he wanted to produce one more piece to get his PhD in filmmaking. And he was like, "Hey, man, so I would love to make another outdoor movie. Do you have any ideas?" And I'm like, "Well, it's actually funny you said that because I had just written a letter called The Drowning Sucks." It was more like an open letter confession, which aims at breaking down the concept of the adrenaline junkie. Again, a preconceived idea, like terminology that would just regurgitate mindlessly, like people saying they conquer a mountain, or they just,
Hmm.
oh, I just want happiness. It's like athletes calling themselves a daredevil. It's like, no, you're not putting in the time and thought to describe why you do this. And
Hmm.
if you truly do it for the rush, you're probably going to be you're going to burn out or be too scared at some point, too hurt, or you'll be dead. So
Hmm.
it's just the way it is. It's not necessarily sustainable. Why do you do what you do? Take the time to ponder on this. And so I did that because I was tired of people calling me an adrenaline junkie. At the same time, I realized I couldn't get mad at the audience for calling me a daredevil because the images are shocking. I get it. I'm jumping off a
Hmm.
600-foot cliff with an avalanche bearing behind and flying away in a parachute. I mean, that comes out of a straight James Bond movie, and I get it. It's complete kooky. When I look back at the images, I'm like, I can't really believe I did this by looking at the images. But while I was in the action, it completely made sense, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, I know I can translate my thoughts and feelings fairly accurately with words. So I got to put in the time to describe my ethos of risk, the reason why and how I take a risk. And that's how Adrenaline Sucks was born. So when Chase called me, I was like, actually, I just wrote that letter and it can totally be used as a script.
Hmm.
It would be an open letter, this and that. I explained kind of what I envisioned. He's like, oh man, actually, I like the idea. And it's like, well, and also have all the images, all the videos we can use to build that piece. So I'll just send you a
Hmm.
bunch of hard drives and I'll send you the open letter. I'll record myself reading it and we can fine tune it together. And after reviewing all the content, he's like, man, we get this. Let me just work on this. Then he
Hmm.
worked on a bunch of different cuts. After a few months, we both liked the final cut that we had. So he came to Ben and we recorded the letter in my garage right here. Just,
Mhm.
put a black screen behind, he put some fancy lighting on, and I could read the letter on the prompter, but in a very, not just reading like yesterday, I went to, like reading in an intentional and thoughtful way. And so it breaks down the ritual, the essence, the truth, every element of how I do what I do, and most importantly, why. And the
Mhm.
purpose behind this is not only to break that cliche of the adrenaline junkie, it's to make people think of their own ethos,
Mhm.
their own risk, and their own endeavor, and hopefully my process can be, I think human patterns in a certain environment are the same patterns as another discipline. The only thing that changes are the variables. So
Mhm.
hopefully people can extract some pieces of knowledge from that to be able to develop their own methodology to reach their audacious and unforgiving goals.
Mhm.
So that's the idea behind Adrenaline Sucks. It's also a 12-minute movie, so I can't just go around and just charge people to come and watch a 12-minute movie. I mean, it's too short, right? So I need to add more to it. So Adrenaline Sucks, by the way, is doing really well on the film festival circuit all over the world.
Mhm.
Except we're going to be featured at the National New Zealand Film Festival. We were just at the Berlin Mountain Film Festival. We've had over 50 stops in Europe. We've had a few festivals in the US, but
Mhm.
I just did a couple showings in Bend where I'm kind of fine tuning the process, but I'm going to go on the Adrenaline Sucks tour where we have, video intro that, traces the whole journey, then, intro to the movie, and then a talk after that, and then an open conversation. My goal is
Mhm.
to have a constructive conversation and have it evolve through time, and for people to hopefully understand, but also reflect. So understand my approach, but then also reflect on their own pursuits and endeavors, and then maybe we can reflect on it together. Like I don't have all the answers, but I am hoping that, again, first step is to live your passion. The second step is to share it. By sharing it, I hope I can start a positive spiral of introspection and self-actualization.
Mhm. I
Sounds
love
maybe
it.
a little arrogant and pompous, but that's what I'm trying to do.
It's authentic, man. I love it. And where can people watch the film if they wanted to watch it today? Is it going to be streaming?
So Adrenaline Sucks, it's probably not gonna be streaming for another about a year and a half because we're
Mhm.
heavy in the film festival circuit right now, and the
Mhm.
film festival circuit always take a couple years. So
Mhm.
hopefully we'll have other showings in Band. I will advertise that on my social media. So Instagram is
Mhm.
probably the best. My handle is at Superfrenchie official.
Mhm.
Pretty easy to remember and find. But I will, yeah, I'm working on hopefully a showing in Portland, maybe Seattle, Denver. So I'm going to start taking this on the road. But then
Mhm.
also, if people are interested, we also have the ability to do private showings. I do a lot of speaking engagements,
Mhm.
for companies or, so corporate speaking is very, very important. And
Mhm.
if someone out there has a company and they want to do an Adrenaline Sucks showing, then we can totally do that as well. So yeah.
Awesome. That's great. Love it. And if I could just insert, you've been so generous with your time. If I could just insert one more question in on that, I think this idea of you writing letters has been really important. You wrote a really impactful letter to your son before going to Pont. I'm going to totally butcher the pronunciation. Pont d'Or. I'm not.
Pointe,
I'm not
yeah,
saying that.
so Pointe d'Areux, which means the needle of Areux,
Hmm.
Areu. And that's where I had a big accident in 2013. I hit the cliff a
Hmm.
bunch of times. I
Yeah.
had brain hemorrhage, double or triple fracture on my femur. I spent 3 days in a coma, 3 weeks before the birth of my son. It was horrible.
Hmm.
It's kind of what started a whole wave of personal changes as well, in my life.
Yeah.
But um, before going back to skiing that mountain again, it took me 6 years. But before going back, I felt like I needed to write my son a letter. So I wrote
Hmm.
him a very intentional letter that he could understand as a 5-year-old at the time, but
Hmm.
also if I weren't to come back, that he could understand as a 20-year-old. And so the idea was to leave something behind substantial for my son instead of just a bunch of cool videos on the internet, or
Hmm.
random stories about his dad that we would hear through other people.
Yeah.
So I did that, and it was very liberating to do this because it helped me commit to my goals. I always say
Hmm.
that to take a risk, helping your loved ones understand why you take a risk will help you commit, and that's exactly what that letter did for me.
Hmm.
And So I think, yeah, I'm not a writer, but I try to spend time writing. I'm slowly, very slowly working on a book as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I think it's important to do that, and I think every parent should do that because again, we're not just parents putting food on the table. We're mentors. Our duty is to guide our children.
It's such a great practice. One of our previous guests was rowing across the Atlantic, and they were about to get caught in this crazy storm, and they didn't know if they were going to make it. And so he also wrote this letter. So I love this theme of before these really critical moments of our lives is like pausing and writing down these truths, these beliefs, these thoughts from the heart to our kids and our families, about where we are today. And I think it's, to your point, a healthy practice that I think people should probably put into place more deliberately over the course of their life. Because I imagine if you wrote that letter today, it might be different. If you wrote that letter 10 years from now, it might be a little different. But
Yeah,
yeah, such a great
I
practice.
think I need to write a new letter because I think it's writing several letters, not necessarily discarding the one you wrote before. Things evolve, right? But
Mm-hmm,
it's life will kill you no matter what, whether you do
mm-hmm,
dangerous things, whether you operate in a dangerous environment or not. Life will kill you.
mm-hmm.
What are you going to leave behind for your kid?
Yeah.
And I'm not even talking about a legacy or this or that.
Mm-hmm,
Just give them some tools so they can operate as thoroughly and as efficiently in their life, and more than this, to actually hopefully be fulfilled as well.
mm-hmm.
It's whatever you learn along the way, maybe put the tools in your child's hand, so they can empower their life as well. It's
Yeah.
just as simple as that. And also, um, if you were to have a car crash or die base jumping off a mountain or whatever it is, life
Mm-hmm,
throws some pretty crazy stuff. I mean, it's just there's a lot of unforeseeable events in life. It's just the way it is, right?
mm-hmm.
But if you can live something substantial for your child, I mean, that's really powerful,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. Lastly, what's next for you? Where are you headed? What are you working on?
So I am here for another 3 weeks. I'm pulling on my calendar right now. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I'm leaving in 3.5 weeks. I'm going back to the Alps for 3 weeks to hopefully knock out another at least one first. I have a never-ending list of things at home that I'm trying to accomplish. So I go back to the Alps several times a year, at least 3 times a year, and so yeah, going back to finish that. Then I'm climbing Mont Blanc. Hopefully, if the weather works out, middle of June,
Mm-hmm,
and with my partner because she's in France. But we'll see. Weather depending, anything can happen when you go up a mountain.
mm-hmm.
Somebody can get sick. The weather can move in. We'll see what happens. So we're
Awesome.
aiming for this, but it's also then I'll be skiing the north face of Mont Blanc and doing a pure ski mountaineering mission with
Mm-hmm,
also we'll have two parties of people guiding, climbing, and my close mountain partner from the Alps is coming with us too. So we're gonna have a little not party, but joint ascent on Mont Blanc, which would be great. And after that, weather depending again, I might do a couple wingsuit jumps in the Alps too, and then I'm back in bed. So then we'll be already end of June, and then I'm going back to France for 3 weeks with my son to do a vacation together. And I've never spoken English with my son; we only speak French together.
mm.
So actually, correct that. I spoke English once with him in France because I was scouting an illegal base jump and he helped me do it. So I had to speak English to him so nobody would understand. But I've already spoken French to him, so this way it's for him to go back to his dual citizen, so for him to go back to the homeland and spend time at home a little bit. So
That's so awesome. I love that. Well,
yeah.
Matthias, this has been amazing. Such a great conversation. I've personally taken away tons of nuggets from this, and I'm so excited to follow along the journey. I've tried to see Adrenaline Sucks twice in Bend, and my kids got sick both times, and so it was unfortunate that I still have not seen the film, but I'm committed to seeing it if you come back around. So,
But
um,
yeah, I'll keep you posted if we have
yeah.
another showing in band. We're fine tuning a couple things before taking that on the road,
Mm-hmm,
and then but yeah, I'll let you know on dates. And I'm actually really excited because people can do whatever they want with the message, but I could say the story in my own terms.
mm-hmm,
And I guess that's what art is. It's you don't do it to necessarily please people, you do it to make a statement. And that movie for me is a very powerful statement where every word in this piece is pondered. I really reflected on every single word to be able to it's to do it justice potently. It's got a lot in there, and it's almost having a written version of it would probably help understand every word, but to watch it is because it's a short movie, if
Hmm.
I'm hoping people can watch it several times and still extract pieces of nuggets that will maybe empower their lives in many
Hmm.
ways too. I'm hoping so. But anyway, I'm really happy about this movie because it's my truth. It's the way it is,
Hmm.
and it feels good to share your truth. Hopefully, it will help others. So,
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, super pumped for that. Thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it, and looking forward to following along on the journey.
awesome, Ben. Thanks for a good conversation. It's great to have the opportunity to do that, especially with other dads. And I think what you're doing is great because um, I think this may be male pride or guardedness. I don't know what it is, but
Hmm.
people don't necessarily talk openly about what it actually really is like to be a dad. And again,
Hmm.
it's we just use blanket statement. Oh, it's great to be a dad. I love my kid. It's family life is awesome. It's like, no, break it down, man. Break it down.
Hmm.
What's the reality? What's the truth behind this? Or what's
Hmm.
your truth? How did you live this? Because I was really hard for me as a dad, struggling through the experience not of just being a dad, but the whole family life thing, changing
Hmm.
things around. Also had my crash before that. I reached out to a couple friends, but nobody opened up about their own experience in fatherhood. And
Hmm.
I think it's and I just heard through Fatherly, actually I do a lot of events and articles with these guys and things like that,
Hmm.
and they had a piece recently that was written on postnatal depression on dads, which we
Hmm.
never talk about. We always talk about postpartum depression for the mom, which is huge, but for dads, it can last 2 to 7 years after your child is born. Nobody
Wow.
talks about it.
Wow.
So I think it's definitely something that needs to be approached a lot more because a lot of dads could avoid that state of existential despair.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. We try to get to the real shit, man, and just be as transparent as possible. And men need that community more than ever to show up as the best men, as best dads they can. So I really appreciate that, and yeah, glad we've got this community established, my brother. And looking forward to again staying in touch and following the journey along.
Awesome. Take care, man.
This has been an episode of the Athlete Dad Podcast. As always, we'd really love your support in helping to get this podcast out into the world. You can do that by sharing it with somebody you care about who you think would really appreciate the content of what we talk about. You can also like and review on all podcast platforms. So go give us some love. It's much appreciated, and it certainly helps us out keeping the show going. It's also important that you give us a follow on Instagram at The Athlete Dad. You can get all the access to all the pictures and content and more from the podcast that we talk about. And of course, I'm a visual person, so I love what we get to share on Instagram, and it keeps you up to date on all the things happening with the podcast. So go give us a follow on Instagram and actually all other socials at The Athlete Dad. If you want exclusive access to content that we do not share publicly on the podcast or socials themselves, you're going to want to sign up for our email list. Go to theathletedad.com, sign up for the email list, become one of our exclusive subscribers, and you'll get access to things like more bonus episodes, deeper dives, other content that we just don't release to the public, things that I think if you really enjoy this topic, you're going to love because we just get much more into the weeds on all of these things. So go to theathletedad.com, sign up for our email list, and grab yourself some of that exclusive content.